Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Ballast Book Launch. I'm honored and privileged to be here with Darrell Utt, former Green Beret and the author of Grit to Glory, From West Virginia to the Streets of Baghdad. Darrell, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah. So before we start, why don't you give the audience just a little bit of your bio and background, and maybe if you can just talk about how many deployments, things you've done, because I think people really like to hear about that.
Sure. I spent 26 and a half years in the Army, Green Beret, Ranger, Sniper, as far as combat deployments. 4 combat deployments to Iraq, all combined 2 years. And then if you count the Balkans, spent a lot of time in the Balkans. That's all pre-9/11, so definitely 6+ deployments there. So we're looking at 10+ for sure.
Yeah, and you talk about the Balkan deployments in Grit to Glory, and there's some really fascinating stuff. I don't think that a lot of people realize pre-9/11 just what we were doing militarily overseas. So there's some really cool stories from Kosovo, right?
Yeah. Kosovo and Bosnia. I mean, I was able to do combat search and rescue during the air war. I was part of a team that protected 2 U.S. presidents by providing counter-sniper security support. President Clinton in Sarajevo on Sniper Alley, of all places. President Bush, 43, in Kosovo. And that was 2001, right before 9/11. He had the whole crew over there, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, Condoleezza Rice, the First Lady. So that was kind of special to do that one. Also did some of the most difficult work of my entire military career, my entire Special Forces career, was doing special reconnaissance in the mountains of Kosovo along the Macedonian border, because there was a lot of mines in those countries, as we all know, and just the mountainous terrain was very unforgiving. So yeah, some of the most difficult work was right there in the Balkans. That's where I cut my teeth.
Wow, yeah. So it gave you good preparation for when the global war on terror kicked off. And
Absolutely. I had a very strong base from my experiences in the Balkans. And we did a little bit with PIFWICs, personnel indicted for war crimes, which is, talked about in the book too.
There's a funny story in there about one individual who was supposed to be Johnny Badass, right? And he had a little accident when he came down with some big burly Special Forces Green Berets knocking down his door.
Yeah, he got manhandled by my best friend Matt Gerard, who's just like a fire hydrant of a man, just a fire hydrant. He's a beast, and he's still serving behind the scenes, still protecting our country and doing great things for our country. And then the other guy that put hands on him was a Golden Gloves champion, Silver Star recipient, just another absolute beast of a man. These are 2 guys that you would never want to tangle with. And I think that's probably the reason why.
You know what? Let's actually not say what happened.
Okay.
All
right.
Leave that as a teaser. If you want to know what happened to this war criminal who was indicted by, I guess, probably the United Nations, the Hague.
Yeah, the Hague.
By the Hague. They didn't have to read Grit to Glory, and I promise you that story alone will be worth the price of admission.
Yeah, it's a funny story.
It really is. So good. Well, Darrell, let's just back up. Obviously, you talk in the subtitle of Grit to Glory. You talk about your humble beginnings in West Virginia. What was childhood in West Virginia like for you?
Yeah, so it was definitely humble beginnings. I think that's a very proper, maybe politically correct way to say that I grew up poor.
Yeah.
But West Virginia is extremely patriotic, blue collar, hard working, just people that grind, get the job done. So that's basically my roots.
Grit.
Grit, man, grit for sure. And I was born to 2 parents that got married super early. I was the baby in the family. I got an older brother and sister, and both of my parents never graduated high school. They just got after it, and my dad worked in a glass factory, and then my mom worked at a mental health institution in Huntington, West Virginia. So that's basically my roots. That's where I came from. And then I feel like I was fortunate to grow up playing sports, even though I wasn't really that great at a couple of the sports. I played basketball, football, baseball. Football was definitely my best sport. Basketball, I was horrible, but that just happened to be my dad's sport that he grew up. So I think he really, that whole father-son thing, he really wanted me to be a little basketball
Ever have to
all-star.
play against Randy Moss?
No, but Randy Moss is definitely one of my guys. Funny Randy Moss story. Randy had some problems with some of the universities, and then he ended up at Marshall University, which plays in Huntington, West Virginia.
Right.
And Marshall, of course, is known, Matthew McConaughey, We Are Marshall,
Crash, yeah.
the Marshall plane crash, which we just had that anniversary. It was actually 14 November 1970 is when that plane went down. So we just had that. I posted on social media. I believe it's been 56, 57 years, something like that, close. But anyway, I just happened to be home in Huntington, West Virginia, and Marshall University had a home game. And I really didn't know that much about Randy Moss. And one of my buddies from high school, we ended up going to the game. It was a home game, and I forgot who they were playing. But he was like, hey, you got to watch this Randy Moss guy. He's from West Virginia. He is an absolute freak of an athlete. And I was thinking to myself, like, yeah, okay,
Right.
sure. I watched that game, and Randy was wearing these long socks with the green and white stripes. I don't know what you call those. But he was like head and shoulders above everyone else, like speed-wise, his height. And he was a freak. He's a physical
Yeah, he could jump
freak.
out of the stadium.
And I don't know how many touchdowns he caught that day, but it was like watching an NFL football player play against like a high school team. That's the best I could.
Yeah. Well, when he was in the NFL, he made other teams look like that. So
yeah.
that doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think that those are, you just named probably the two things that area of West Virginia are most famous for, the plane crash, unfortunately, and Randy Moss. So
Nick Saban too. Nick Saban happens to
that's
be
where he's from, Nick Saban.
from yeah.
Okay.
But going back to my roots there before we started talking about Randy, I played sports, never played against Randy, and I also was my dad's partner, hunting, fishing, and trapping.
Yeah.
So I had that good base. Didn't even realize what that was going to do for me later on. And it's almost like I was built for the military. I was built for special forces, that just hardworking grit background.
Yeah, and you weren't used to gourmet food, which is very handy when you join the military and the Army in particular. And you mentioned that Burger King was a gourmet meal, but there was something else that you had the most success hunting that was delicious, right? What was that animal that you like to eat that growing up that you ate a lot of?
Yeah, ate a lot of squirrel growing up,
Yeah.
which is basically like a rat of the forest. I don't do that anymore, by the way.
Yeah.
But my grandma used to make biscuits and gravy with the squirrel meat.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed it at the time, but yeah, not so much anymore.
Yeah. So after high school, did you kind of feel like your only options were joining the military, or did you know early on that you wanted to join the military?
Well, it was definitely something I was tossing around in my mind. I was an average student, just like I was an average athlete. And, my parents couldn't afford to send me to college. And luckily for me, and this is a person that I'm very proud to talk about in my book, is Coach Thornburg, my high school football coach. Yeah. That was a National Guard Sergeant Major, Special Forces National Guard Sergeant Major, and he took me under his wing. But initially, I wanted to join the Marine Corps because I was very intrigued by the Marine Corps, and my dad had told me that no one from our family had ever served in the Marines. So that was going to be, that was going to be like, hey, I'm going to be the first. Cool. It would be a great honor for my family to represent and be part of the Marine Corps. Unfortunately, that didn't work out, and I ended up entering the Army, which I think it was just kind of meant to be. But yeah, initially didn't have a lot of options, and the military just seemed like a natural fit.
And so once you join, you were part of some pretty famous units, starting with the 101st. Why don't you just give us at least your training, through Ranger, SF, all that, kind of just give us that background of what you did in the Army.
Sure. So when I initially entered the Army, I came in as an infantry guy, and I served, actually when I was going through basic training in AIT, It was right during Desert Shield, Desert Storm. And it's one of the times that I was probably most scared in the military as an 18-year-old kid, because, of course, we were ramping up for Desert Shield, Desert Storm against Saddam Hussein, someone that had gassed his own people. So the first time I'm going through like chemical weapons training and all of that, they had all these very grotesque pictures like, hey, if you guys don't pay attention and you end up in the desert,
this is going to happen.
This could happen to you. So you need to know how to put on your protective mask and all of your, gear and stuff like that. So I remember being super scared about that. But yeah, I got through all that. My first duty station was out in...
Sorry, which is kind of interesting when you hear some of the later stories in combat and, your plane being shot at and the evasive maneuvers that the pilots had to take flying into Iraq and all the different combat you went through. You think that during basic was the most scared you were in the military.
Yeah, for sure, because, you're just being so green, so young, so naive.
Right.
By the time... I was on my second trip to Iraq. It was something that
like old hat.
Yeah, it was old hat. But my first duty station was, I didn't know how great I had it, was 7th ID Light Infantry in Fort Ord, California, which is in Monterey.
Which I know well. We talked about this yesterday. My dad went to Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey when I was like 12 or 13, and Fort Ord had the Black Horse Golf Course. It was beautiful, right on the water, those cliffs. Yeah, that was a beautiful area.
So I never spent any time on the golf course, but another thing that Fort Ord had in abundance was poison ivy, poison oak.
You know what? I remember that as well. I was.
Did you ever hear a rumor about the poison ivy or poison oak on Fort Ord?
I know, I never did.
Okay, here's the rumor that went around like crazy. It spread like wildfire.
Like poison ivy?
It spread like poison ivy. That during the Vietnam War, they were experimenting with different types of poisonous plants. And this is the rumor that they had manufactured or planted all of this poison ivy, poison oak to see what it would do, to see if they could possibly use it in Vietnam to kind of cut off certain areas or at least make it super uncomfortable. I don't know if that ever happened, but I know it made it super uncomfortable for me because I got it just by looking at it.
It's funny you say that. I've never thought about it. I always thought I was just super allergic to poison ivy or poison oak, whatever it was. But the only times I ever really got it was when I lived in Monterey, and I got it bad. I remember being in calamine baths, and I'd get in trouble. My parents would be mad at me. Why? We told you to quit going in the woods. So that's interesting. That's something I didn't know, but that makes a lot of sense because it was like super poison ivy there.
Oh yeah. It was. I mean, it was like you could almost just get it from being around it. It's like in the air. It's how potent and strong it was. Yeah. But I was there, and then they ended up deactivating 7th ID Light Infantry, and they moved us up to Fort Lewis, Washington. So I was up there for a year. We were right beside 2nd Ranger Battalion. So that was really my first exposure to special operations. And I say special operations, a lot of people kind of misuse the term special operations, special forces. Right. Two different things. Yep. Special operations is the umbrella that JSOC, Navy SEALs, Air Force Combat Controllers, Green Berets, Rangers, they're all under the special operations umbrella. And then when you say special forces, you're talking about Green Berets. Right. But so that was my first exposure to a special operations unit, Ranger Battalion. And it was very clear to me as a young man, I think by this time I was a Sergeant E5, 21-year-old kid, that they were a notch above everyone else, that I had been around. They ran faster, they rucked harder and longer and faster. I mean, these guys just seemed like robots to me. So that was kind of like an initial seed that kind of planted like, oh, there's higher units.
Did that intimidate you or inspire you? Or maybe a little of each?
I think it was a little bit of each. Because, you're looking at guys that were like robots to me, so you're like, man, I'm definitely not at that level because those dudes are like crazy, intense and fast. And, so I was probably a little intimidated. And then I was also inspired, like, hey, if they can do it, maybe that's something I could do. And it kind of like planted a seed in my mind because my next duty station was Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And there's not a Ranger Battalion at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, but there is a Special Forces group at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and that's 5th Special Forces Group, the Legion. So so I got to see those guys as well, and that's probably what really put me over the top. Was, you know, we're going to the ranges and shooting, and we have helmets and Ranger body armor and all the gear. And I'm driving by some of these ranges, and I'm seeing these Special Forces guys out there shooting sniper rifles and baseball hats and, you know, boonie caps, and they're not wearing all the stupid gear, and they're constantly training. So that was super impressive to me, and I think that was the bit that little bit that inspired me to go talk to a recruiter and throw my hat in the ring.
And so what happened? What was your first special operations school or toe in the water of special operations?
Yeah, so when I went through Special Forces assessment and selection, I wasn't Ranger qualified.
So you did that first.
I wasn't airborne qualified. I was trying to make my way to Ranger school, and I still have the scar. I don't know if you can see it from where you're at.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was going to pre-Ranger at Fort Campbell so I could go to Ranger school and earn my Ranger tab. And I ended up getting bit by a brown recluse spider.
Wow.
And I didn't feel it, though. I didn't even know that I was bitten. Luckily for me, there was and actually he's pretty famous Green Beret that was in my pre-Ranger class. I'm pretty sure his name was Mario Vigil. I could be slandering that name, but he was a Green Beret 18 Delta medic.
Yep.
And he just happened to be like in my platoon, in my squad, and he looked at my hand because I was like, you know, something's wrong. I had the streaks going up my arm from this spider bite, and just I was very fortunate and blessed that I went to him and said, "Hey, there's something wrong with me. I don't know what it is." And I was kind of getting ready to lose it. Like, you know, I couldn't keep it together anymore. Like I was getting ready to pass out or something.
Yeah.
And he said, "Hey, you got bit by something. It's infected. Your time is done. Like, you need to get out of here now." And I was like, I don't think they're gonna, you know, we're way out in the middle of nowhere, Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And I was like, I don't know, you know, scared to tell someone. He said, "No, this is real world. This is," you know, he didn't tell me like, "Hey, you could die," but he goes, "This is super important. You're done. I'm going to get you out of here. You're going to medevac, medical evacuation." So luckily for me, that's what happened. And he went on, the reason I say that he was a famous Green Beret, he went on to be part of the horse soldiers in Afghanistan. Oh, yeah. And then he went on to be a very senior leader. I think he was either the USAFIC or USASOC Command Sergeant's Major. So he had a very distinguished career, but I just got lucky. So that kind of kept me out of the Ranger school thing, but it was something I always wanted to do. So I went to Special Forces assessment and selection. That was my first, you know, special ops, you know, experience. Did really well. I was never like one of those guys, the most gifted, most physically fit. You know, I was never one of those guys.
You had to grit it through.
I had to grit it through. But, you know, I was going to work hard. I was going to be humble, and I wasn't going to quit. And I could take a lot of abuse. My body could take a lot of abuse. And I'm not saying that I was, you know, terrible physically, but I just wasn't like one of the fastest gazelles or, you know, but I could run, I could ruck, and I could just take a lot of punishment. So made it through Special Forces assessment and selection, got selected to go to the Special Forces qualification course. Was very challenged going through the qualification course. And because I went through as a communications sergeant. So, you know, yeah, you're doing all the communications equipment and the radios and antenna, you know. We had to learn advanced international Morse code, which definitely crushed me mentally. That was one of the most mentally challenging courses. Trying to learn dots and dashes drove me flipping insane, you know, to learn Morse code. It was tough. It was very tough for me mentally, and I thought it was going to be one of those courses like, I think this is probably going to get me. Wow. because you have to be able to test out, you have to be able to receive a certain speed and listen and know what what's going on. And then you also have to send it with a leg key the same speed. So that was super challenging. Did you ever use that
in your career? You obviously
no.
Did you ever use it?
Never did.
It's like
Never
trigonometry
did.
in high school.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
gotta pass it, but
yeah, it was something. I did have to use it like going through the course.
Right.
Like the final phase is Robin Sage.
But never in a real world.
Never ever in a real world environment. So, another thing that was very challenging for me as a communications guy, I was with stereotypically speaking, when you're looking at the different special forces MOSs, stereotypically, when you're talking about a medic, a special forces medic, they're typically the smartest dudes. And then you got the communications guys. Then you have the engineers because they got to do math and calculations for explosives and all that stuff. And then it goes down to the weapons sergeant. So that's stereotypically kind of where you're at on
I'm sure all your weapons sergeants will appreciate you calling them dumb.
Yeah. Sorry, guys.
They probably know it.
Sorry, guys. Sorry. That's just this. I'm talking stereotypical type stuff here. But, so I was in class. My point is, I was in class with some really smart dudes.
Yeah.
And here I am, a guy, not the smartest guy, but just a guy that's going to work and get after it.
Grit it out again.
Yeah. And I remember testing out on radios, and it was like, okay, this is a PSC-5 satellite communication radio. Go ahead and set everything up and do a shot, and you got to set your antenna up and all that. And I remember all the different radios that we were going to get tested on. And the day that we tested, I was still trying to remember how to identify the different radios, like what the name of the radio was. It's like I was way behind people, but I just knew the procedure. I knew the steps, and I just did it over and over and over. I was also a guy going through with all the written tests that you have to take because there's a ton, which maybe is not that advertised. It's all like, rucking and running
shooting,
and push-ups and shooting, but, we had to take a lot of tests that you have to pass, and I was the guy that was making my own pre-test with multiple choice, answers just so I could get more reps and more study. So yeah. Anyway, made it through the qualification course, earned my Green Beret. My first duty assignment was Stuttgart, and that's where that whole desire to finish up what I'd started with pre-Ranger and Ranger School, that's where that kind of came in, because it was something that I wanted to do and I wasn't able to accomplish it. So I ended up going through Ranger School I was a 30-year-old Special Forces Green Beret, which you tend to get a little extra attention and love.
Yeah, what was that like with the cadre and with the other candidates?
Yeah, so with the Ranger instructors, they know who's who.
Yeah.
So they knew I was a Green Beret. And some of them were super cool about it and kind of would talk to me off to the side, and some of them, I used to think like, man, maybe he went to selection and got hurt, or maybe he went through the Q course and got dropped for whatever reason. Right, so he's kind of got a vendetta, and I get to be the person he takes it out on. So it was kind of a mix, but overall the experience was a positive one. Ranger School is a leadership school. I went as a staff sergeant, 30 years old, so I'm in a course with all these young kids to me, like 21, 22-year-old, like West Pointers that had just graduated, or guys that just went through ROTC, or like these 19-year-old kids straight out of Ranger Battalion that are hardcore, hard as nails. And one of the funnier stories, at least to me, I can look back at and laugh. I didn't laugh at the time, though. So in Ranger School, when I went through in the year 2000. I'll be coming up on my 25th anniversary here pretty soon next year. When I went through Ranger School, they had the students box each other. So we put on boxing gloves, and they paired us up by height. So I was paired up with this kid. I can't remember what Ranger Battalion he was from, but he's maybe second or third Ranger Battalion. I don't know.
What are you? You're about 6 feet?
Yeah, I'm 6 foot tall. Went through Ranger School. I'm probably like 180. 190, so way skinnier than I am now. But I'm a 30-year-old man and I'm paired up with this 6 foot 19-year-old kid from Ranger Battalion. And before we went, I was like, hey man, remember how we like did combatives, because we did a lot of combatives and kind of fighting and stuff like that. Yeah. It's like, hey, no one wants to get hurt doing that and get dropped from the course. So sometimes you kind of got to pretend like you're WWE, it's like, oh, ooh, like you kind of got to play it a little bit. So I was like, hey, maybe it's wise that we don't go 100%, let's hold back a little bit, but we'll make it seem like we're going 100%. Well,
how do you respond to
he like shook his head, but that's not what happened, because they had us back to back, because they didn't want us, too far out and then kind of like running into each other and, really pounding on one another. Yeah. So they started us back to back. And then when they blew the whistle, you turned around where you were and you throw down.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, 75%. But when that whistle blew and I turned around, I walked right into his right hand. And that was 100%, dude. Like, he hit me. And then it was game on after that.
Windmills, throwing fists.
Oh, yeah. And it was only for, I don't even know how many seconds, probably 30 seconds and to a round or something like that. But that's one of my funnier moments from Ranger School. I didn't appreciate it at the time, but I always look back. And I do think that was a valuable thing. I don't know if they still do that. But I think our country as a whole would be a lot better if we had more people that at least had that punch in the face and know what that feels like.
If not just at Ranger School, in real life.
In real life.
How many kids grow up without getting punched in the face?
Yeah, I mean, we have you would say that, some people would say that our society has gotten a lot more ruder, things like that. So I think that we could solve that problem if people got punched in the face every now and then.
I agree. I got punched in the face quite a bit growing up.
Me too. Me too. But after Ranger School, I was rewarded because I did a really good job going through Ranger School. I made it straight through. I was 6-0, like on my patrols that I had. So, I mean, it was all very basic. That was my entire life up to that point. I'd been doing that type of stuff.
Yeah.
So I did very well. And then I got rewarded by graduating Ranger School, going straight through 6-0 patrol record. I got rewarded and I got to go to sniper school.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, which, it's got a fancy name. It's Special Operations Target Interdiction Course, SOTIC, but it's sniper. Yeah. That was really interesting. It was a fun school, but it's one of those courses where it's like, you think it's just like shooting, but there's so much more that goes into it, with winds
patrolling.
And patrolling. You got to get set up in your hide site without getting compromised, ghillie suits. You're with a partner, so, when it's a 2-person movement, it's not just like a guy just out there shooting a rifle. I mean, that's pretty easy, but there's a lot of complexity that goes into that type of work.
Memorizing terrains and a big mental aspect to it, right?
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So from there, I guess probably soon thereafter was your deployment to Kosovo, which I think we talked about. I want to get into that first Iraq deployment, and then we'll go into the big one that Grit to Glory covers a lot of, the 2006 Iraq deployment. So after sniper school, anything else monumental or significant happened before, other than the Kosovo deployment, before the first Iraq deployment?
Just what we talked about earlier with, protecting the presidents and doing special reconnaissance, combat search and rescue, those things. Mm-hmm. So that's what I was doing before 9/11. And then
where were you on 9/11?
I was at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I was actually in a non-commissioned officer education school, that we had to go to make Sergeant First Class E7. Mm-hmm. So I was sitting in a classroom. It's funny, people our age will know this, but the first plane hit the tower, and then one of the instructors came in, and I'm in a classroom full of Green Berets from all the different groups. There's 5 active duty Special Forces groups. Mm-hmm. There's 2 National Guard Special Forces groups. So I'm in a classroom full of Green Berets from all the different groups in the regiment. Instructor walks in, whispers something into our instructor's ear. We don't know what's going on. And then he leaves. And then he comes back in and he's wheeling the TV on the cart, if you remember those from back in the day from school and stuff like that. So we had a TV on top of the cart. He wheeled it in, plugged it in, and was like, hey, something's going on in New York. Plane hit the World Trade Center. And then, like, right when he plugged in the TV and we started watching it, we watched live the second plane hit.
Yeah.
And it was just like, wow, like it became very, very real that our life had changed. Our military, you know, everything had changed for us in the military. We knew it instantly. And it was just a matter of like, who's gonna get the call?
Yeah.
You know, who's gonna go in?
Were you excited? All this training, everything, you figured, hey, I'm going to war now.
Oh yeah. Like there's no doubt, and it's something that really makes me think. Joe Rogan is someone that I have a lot of respect and admiration for. Joe Rogan, because I just think he's a beast of a man. But if you ever hear Joe Rogan talk about 9/11, because I think he was in New York when 9/11 happened, and he talks about how scared he was. And I mean, because it was a scary day, and it was a sad day, you know, especially seeing the people jump off the towers. That is just devastating. But to hear Joe Rogan talk about this, you know, someone that I really respect and think he's a man's man, and he was just like, man, on 9/11, dude, I was scared. I was scared. And I was in a classroom full of dudes that were hungry, that was like, put us in, coach.
Yeah.
Like, they just did this to our country. Put us in the game, please.
Yeah. So how long was it until you were put in the game?
Well, it wasn't. I never got put in the game in Afghanistan. Right. Yeah, I was put in the game. Yeah, different game in Iraq. But my memories of Afghanistan, because I was in Stuttgart, Germany, we were pissed off because Fifth Group was in. You know, it was the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
You know, so Fifth Group, you know, horse soldiers, all that, they were in Afghanistan. Third Special Forces Group was over there as well. I think we had some National Guard Special Forces units that were over there. And a lot of us were like, man, you know, we're so prepared. We're so trained. All of the stuff that we had done in the Balkans, I thought prepared us perfectly for the mountains of Afghanistan. And we were setting it out. So we were pissed off.
Yeah.
And then to make matters even worse, even though I'm very honored to say that I did this, one of the casualties, and this is how naive I was at the time too, one of the casualties, a Special Forces guy from Afghanistan early on, I'm not going to say his name, but he was killed in Afghanistan, and they were bringing his body back, and the body came back through Germany like normal.
Yeah,
they normally do,
Ramstein,
and then
right?
then it goes to Dover. Mm-hmm. So I was one of the guys that brought him off the plane, and it was very much an honor for me to do that. But it was kind of a kick in the balls too, because it's like, man, we're not in the game, and then we have to be like funeral detail.
Yeah.
Even though it was an honor, but it was still kind of a kick in the balls. But here's how naive I was about, you know, killing and death and all of those things. I remember we picked up the casket to take it off the plane, and it was so heavy. And in my mind, I was thinking to myself, like, man, was this like a bigger SF dude? Like, terrible, you know, tragedy that he was killed. But in my mind, I'm like, man, how big was this dude? He's heavy. Mm-hmm. I didn't know it at the time, but they shipped all the bodies back with like the big chunks of the dry ice that were in. So that's why it was so heavy to me. But yeah, man, that was Afghanistan, and that feeling of like, man, we really won in the game. I ended up leaving Germany in 2002, went to Fort Carson, Colorado. And as soon as I signed in to Fort Carson, Colorado, which is where 10th Group headquarters is, we started preparing for the war in Iraq. So that was my introduction to the global war on terror.
Before the invasion.
Oh yeah, yeah.
We were 2003, I think.
Yeah. Fall of 2002, we were prepping.
You knew you were going.
Knew we were going. We just didn't know when. And it's funny when I look back at the intelligence that we got in the fall of 2002, because everything was capitulation, which I didn't really even know what that meant at the time. I was like, hey, what what the hell are they talking about with capitulation? And I was like, oh, they're all the Iraqi army guys. They're all going to surrender. They're not going to fight. You know, the CIA is working with like Saddam's generals, and they got all this stuff all worked out. And we're going to go in there. They're going to capitulate, surrender. We're going to find the weapons of mass destruction. You know, everything was just going to be perfect, and it didn't go that way.
Yeah. It usually doesn't.
Yeah.
So what was it like that first deployment to Iraq? What month in 2003 did
So,
you go?
Yeah, we left Fort Carson, Colorado in February of 2003. So a full month.
Right before the invasion.
Yeah, a full month before the invasion. And
where'd you go?
we were pre-staged in Romania, like right there on the, I think it's the Black Sea, Baltic Sea, one of those seas. But it was cold as hell. And they were trying to keep us out of the press, the papers, and the news and stuff. So we were kind of secluded in this like little hotel because there was no one there because it's winter and it's cold. But we were just waiting to go in, and little did we know that there was a lot of diplomatic efforts in the background with the State Department and Turkey, because the plan was we were going to go into Turkey, and then we were going to drive in from Turkey to northern Iraq, link up with the Kurdish Peshmerga, and fight our way from Erbil all the way west to Mosul. And our assignment was like, hey, there's 10 to 12 Iraqi divisions up north. You guys, Special Forces with the Kurdish Peshmerga, you guys need to keep these divisions engaged so they don't all leave northern Iraq and go reinforce Baghdad, because that's the main effort. That's where they were doing the thunder runs with the tanks and all that stuff. So our job was to keep them busy up north so our guys could take Baghdad and not have to fight another 10 to 12 divisions. Turkey didn't cooperate, of course. They didn't let us go in, which is where all of our vehicles and gear was pre-staged. So we ended up trying to fly in from Romania. It never worked out. We would get on the plane, get off the plane, get on the plane, get off the plane. And there's a picture in Grit to Glory of me being on the back of an AC-130, and I'm reading a Dean Koontz book. This is before Jack Carr came out with all of his great books. So I'm reading a Dean Koontz book, and you can just see the look on my face. It's just like,
come on,
this is dumb.
Yeah.
Like, we're never going to fly in. Like, we're going to miss the whole war, because they can't just get their stuff straight. But luckily they flew us from Romania to Jordan, and then they figured out an alternative route to fly us in over the western part of Iraq and then over the northern part to get us into Erbil, which is where we flew in. So they had these 6 AC-130s, or MC-130s, I'm sorry, 6 MC-130s. And that's how we flew in, and that was Operation Ugly Baby.
It wasn't an easy flight.
It wasn't an easy flight. We did get a lot of, ground fire. And during this time, too, a lot of the air support, it's like, because we're right around the time of the invasion, 21st, 22nd, somewhere in there of March. So our Air Force didn't have time to soften or kill all the targets. So there was still a lot of unknowns, and they tried to plan the best route, but we still ran into a lot of AAA, the anti-aircraft artillery, still ran into a lot of ground fire. It wasn't a pleasant flight. It was a lot of ups and downs, and I'm a guy, I don't like crazy flights. I don't like roller coasters. That does nothing for me. Yeah. And it's still, to this day, all these years later, if I'm in a civilian flight, and it gets a little crazy because turbulence, my mind instantly goes back to 2003, to that like rocky roller coaster flight. Just a crazy experience for sure.
And so that, I don't know how much you want to go into that deployment. I think that was not as kinetic as your next Iraq deployment, which is the one we want to spend the most time on, because that was what you talk about in Grit to Glory.
Yeah. Actually, my next deployment to Iraq was 2004, 2005.
Okay.
And that was, we were east of Bakuba, right along the Iranian border. and we were doing a lot of intel work. And actually that '03, like after Ugly Baby, it was pretty anticlimactic
Yeah.
for us. I mean, we didn't really do a lot. A lot of our other teams did some like very heroic special forces, like great stuff. It wasn't our team. 04, 05, we did a lot of intel work, and that really kind of set the stage for 2006, which is what Grit to Glory is based on. It's based on January to August 2006 rotation to Baghdad, Iraq. We were at Camp Apache in Adamiyah. Adamiyah is a suburb of Baghdad.
And so tell us who we are. So at this point, you've been a Green Beret for, I don't know, almost 10 or so years. You've done several deployments. So now you're the guy, right? You have your own ODA. Talk about your role in the ODA as the enlisted leader, and how that all came about.
Yeah, so I actually took the team in 2005. So I'd been in the military 15 years, and this was the pinnacle of being a special forces team sergeant, which a team sergeant is the senior enlisted leader of the special forces team. So you're running the day-to-day operations of a full, 12-man team, an operational detachment alpha, an ODA. It is the absolute pinnacle.
A team for everyone who's
an A team.
Mr. T and
yeah. Actually, there is another higher rung on the ladder of, the pinnacles being a special forces team sergeant. Mm-hmm. The rung that's higher is being a special forces team sergeant and leading a team in combat. So I was getting ready to have that opportunity, and not a lot of people get to have that. I mean, all the guys before me, many of them had never been to the Balkans. Many of them had just been like, hey, my 2-year team sergeant time, we did some training missions in Africa, or we did a training mission in Poland with the Polish special forces dudes. So to be a special forces team sergeant in combat is just, you can't get higher than that. But that was my role, and I was able to train my team 2005 and get them ready. I had a very, very young team, a lot of brand new guys, a lot of guys that had never been in combat. So we trained really hard. We worked our tails off. That was kind of like, my MO.
Other teams would have the afternoons or whatever off. You guys were training.
We were training, and they definitely laughed because we were doing a lot of the basics. We were changing tires on our gun trucks, or we were hooking up vehicles with the tow straps and trying to figure that all out. All of this stuff came into major play later on, but at the time, they kind of got a kick out of it that we were just working so hard, doing all the basics. And that's like I talk about in the book, like hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard.
Yeah.
I definitely lived through that. I definitely got to see that.
Yeah. Okay. And so you train them up. You guys are ready. You have this almost like dream deployment scenario. And it kind of worked out that way. I mean, you got all the action you wanted to. So talk about where you're staged and what a lot of the ops that you did are outlined in the book, and there's some there's some funny stories. There are some really interesting stories, but just in general, how was that deployment?
Yeah, it was everything that we'd asked for. And we had kind of an ambiguous mission. It was like, hey, conduct special operations with impact, and which is very open-ended.
Hey, yeah.
Yes, we were doing a lot of intel work, kind of behind the scenes intel work and talking to locals and writing reports and things like that. But we viewed ourselves as much more than that, that, hey, we're just not going to stay in the house and write reports. Like, our partner force that was adjacent to us, not in our compound, but adjacent to us, was some guys from the 101st. And they had a really difficult job because they were working with the Iraqi army, and they were going into Adamiyah. Adamiyah, just for context, is a Sunni stronghold. And allegedly, it was the last place that Saddam Hussein was seen in public before he went underground and, was hiding in spider holes and all that other crazy stuff. His last place that he was seen publicly was Adamia. And I say that because that's just how much of a Sunni stronghold that was, because Saddam Hussein was Sunni himself. He felt comfortable in Adamia to show his face, amongst his people.
Right.
So what that meant for us is, we were at ground zero of the action. And I talk about in the book, Iraq was a very violent, deadly place when we got there in January 2006. Already very violent, very deadly. And then on February 22nd, 2006, al-Qaeda militants bombed a Shia mosque in Samarra, and it ignited a civil war.
Right.
And we got to see that play out every single day. Going back to the 101st, I think this is important to note too. We had a gentleman's agreement with the 101st guys. Like, hey, they asked us, like, hey, if we ever get in trouble in Adamia, will you guys come help us? I was like, hell yeah, we will. Just let us know. With the caveat, don't call us for dumb stuff. Like, hey, it's a suspected, improvised explosive device. Like, we don't care.
That's not an SF mission.
Yeah, we don't care.
Yeah.
But if you're like seriously under fire and you need help, we're gonna come. But understand this, we're gonna bring it.
Yeah.
And we're probably gonna burn some shit down. Which is really one of our MOs. You see a lot of pictures. There's typically smoke or fire in the background of our engagements. It's like, just know that we're gonna let loose when we come out there. So if you're not wanting to damage the neighborhood or put some cars on fire or whatever, like, don't call us. Yeah, kill some bad guys. Don't call us. With that gentleman's agreement, though, it's like, hey, we'll come help you. And if we ever need something, you'll come help us. And they were absolutely. So that was a great agreement that we had between our units. And we definitely respected that. And it meant a lot to me, too, as a leader. Because I came from the 101st.
Right.
I was one of these guys.
Yeah.
So it meant a lot to me that I could support my old unit. And I never had that whole arrogant viewpoint, like, we're special forces, we're Green Berets, and you guys are just regular Army guys. Like, no, man, a lot of those kids, young kids, were out there risking it every single day. It would break my heart. When we would get the reports every morning, single amputee, double amputee, triple amputee, killed in action, and I felt like, we were the solution to some of those problems. Like, these bad guys are blowing up our dudes.
Yeah.
And, for me too, as an American, and I kind of miss this, now that I'm not in the military and I've been retired for several years, especially with what we just went through with the election. But, back in Iraq, it was never like, hey, we need some help. We're under fire. It was never like, well, is it a group of white dudes? Is it, are there Mexicans out there, black dudes? Like, no, man, it's Americans.
Yeah.
Like, we're all in the same team.
Yeah.
Like, we're coming. We're going to help you. We'll be there. And I miss that camaraderie, that togetherness, that we're all in this thing together.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think that we forget that, but I do miss that, like, hey, we're all one team and we're going to have each other's back.
Yeah. Yeah. And in Grit to Glory, you tell some of the stories about coming and some of the coming to, I don't want to say help, or if it's accurate, to augment the 101st when they were in some pretty big gun battles. There's a really cool one with some things that you guys did in the streets. Well, again, we'll let the audience read it.
That's 17 April 2006.
Yeah, yep. You're Alive Day, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot going on that day, a lot of combat, and it's a real fascinating story. So I want to transition to the book and to your process and talk a little bit about that. Is there anything else from that deployment before we go into your writing process and what it was like doing the book and your why for doing the book that you want to address before we move to that?
Yeah, definitely. I want to talk about one of my proudest days as a Special Forces team sergeant. And surprisingly enough, it was for a mission that was never conducted. We never did this mission, but still, it's my proudest day. We had 2 kids from the 101st. Actually, there was three kids. They were down in Yusufia, which was an Al-Qaeda rat nest. 101st kids. One of them got killed, and then they took the other 2 as hostage. And it was a dust wind, which is duty status whereabouts unknown. It's like, hey, we didn't know if they were killed. We didn't know if they're prisoner. We didn't know initially. But we responded to that, and we tried to work our network. We had people that were down in Yusufia. We tried every single thing that we could to get intelligence on where these 2 guys might have been located. And it was very important to us that we try to do every single thing that we could, because we knew in our mind these guys were probably getting tortured. And it was...
You'd seen at that point. You'd seen what the enemy was doing.
We'd seen what they were doing. Yes.
You'd seen and smelled the bodies with drill holes in them.
Yes, definitely.
Heads decapitated. You knew what the enemy was not just capable of, but were doing regularly.
Yeah, definitely. And we wanted to try to do every single thing that we possibly could. In a way, it was like my team's Saving Private Ryan moment. Like, how much should we risk to save these 2 guys? Like,
and you didn't even know if they were alive, dead. You
didn't
know.
You
were willing to.
We were willing to go, and I remember this area was so deadly and violent. They had like a collar system for the roads. So green, if the roads are green, that means everything's good, no problem. It's like driving here in the U.S. Yellow would be, there might be an improvised explosive device. Yeah. Red, there's probably a few IEDs. Black road was like, you're going to hit an IED and it might be catastrophic. Like, they're everywhere. Mm-hmm. So the roads down there in the area where these kids were, a lot of them were black. So I always felt it was important as a team sergeant, as a leader, to get buy-in on missions such as this. Like, I want to make sure that the guys I'm with, like, you guys are down 100%. You know what you're getting into. This is probably our most dangerous mission if this thing goes. Are you sure what I'm asking you to do, that you're good with it?
Yeah.
Because it's going to be dangerous, and maybe some of us are not going to make it back, which I knew in my mind if we went, I was going to lose guys. Now, the mission, we never executed the mission.
They were found.
They ended up being found, and they were already dead.
And tortured.
And tortured. One of them was decapitated.
Yeah. And these are U.S. Army soldiers.
U.S. young American soldiers from the 101st. We were getting ready to execute the mission before they told us to stand down, and it was just one of my proudest days as a team sergeant, because everybody that I was with were like, "Hey,
good to go.
It's worth it to us. Let's go try to get these kids."
Yeah,
and that's my proudest day.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so transitioning from that deployment, come home, do another deployment. You still continue your career, but that's I think that is the gist of Grit to Glory. And then I think you do a really good job of tying in some leadership things, and so talk a little bit before we go into actual writing of the book. Grit code. So and just so the audience knows, in Grit to Glory, after going through all the things that happen on this deployment, then Darrell goes into some of his leadership philosophies, and which you've touched on briefly here, but I think they encompass in your I don't know if it's your kind of your trademark, but the Grit code. Just tell the audience a little bit about what that is and how that helped you in your career.
Yeah, so the Grit code for me, it's from my time growing up in West Virginia, to joining the military, to being in special forces, to being a special forces leader in combat, to post-retirement, to being a senior executive as the chief of operations at the National Medal of Honor Museum Foundation. The Grit Code is simply a blueprint for navigating through the challenges of life, because we all know life is going to punch you in the face at some point. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you're going to get punched in the face. So the grit code is that blueprint to help you navigate through it. And there's 8 principles of the grit code. I'll mention just a few. And these really helped me through my career. Adopt a no surrender mindset, control what you can control, possess an extreme work ethic, relentlessly execute, calm breeds calm, courage is contagious, embrace innovation, and eradicate arrogance. Actually, I listed all 8 of them right then. But those are the 8 principles that really help me navigate through those curveballs and those punches in the face. Now, also, it's not just for like dealing with adversity. It's also if things are going great and you're successful. You're middle of the road, but you want to kind of ratchet it up a little bit, and you want to go from success to maybe being exceptional. The grit code will help with that too. So yeah, it's something that it's just lessons that I was able to learn and kind of go back to when I was dealing with some challenges.
Yeah. And so what are you doing now with that? I mean, you're consulting, speaking, but how can the lessons that you learned in your career, under fire, in selection, how can those lessons that you learned help other people in their day-to-day lives now?
Yeah, well, I'm hoping that that'll inspire people, that people will actually be able to use these, and it transcends, occupations. It's not just for people that want to be in the military or people that want to be Green Berets. It's for executives. It's for college students. It's for high school kids. I think that these principles of the grit code can help everyone, and definitely inspire.
Yeah, I can tell you, just as an author and a business owner, there are lessons that I took out of Grit to Glory that that I've already started to implement. So I think that people in all walks of life can learn a lot from your story, from your philosophies, from your leadership style, and not only reading the book, but working directly with you. So. Great job with that.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the process for the book. You had a wonderful co-writer, Lauren and Geldy. I hope, Lauren, I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing your last name wrong. I don't know, Darrell, if you can do a better job, but hopefully I'm
it sounds the same when I pronounce it.
Okay, good. Lauren's a wonderful writer. You had a really good experience working with her. Tell us a little bit about what your writing process was.
Yeah, Lauren's super talented. And, when I was going through the podcast circuit, and initially it was to help promote the Medal of Honor Museum. I got to usually...
Were you the director of operations?
I was the chief of operations. Yeah, chief of operations. So doing the podcast, I was able to tell my story, and then I was also able to talk about the Medal of Honor and building the museum in Arlington, Texas, and all those things. I did that for 2.5 years. But when I started doing the podcast circuit, typically... when we ended the podcast, people would say, "Hey, man, you got a great story. You should write a book." I heard that over and over and over. And finally, on one of the podcasts, we ended it, and the guy said, "Hey, you got some really cool stories. You should write a book." And I was like, funny you say that. I've heard that before, but I wouldn't even know where to start. I wouldn't even know how to do it. And he is the one that connected me with Lauren. Mm-hmm. And I talked with Lauren on the phone, and the first time we had a conversation, I knew that she was the author for me. She's very bright. She's very articulate. She's very professional. She's worked with guys like
there's a lot of dick and fart jokes in the book, so she has there's team room stuff.
Yeah, there's
guys,
team room,
guys, funny, practical jokes. So she had to be able to. To write that, and I thought she did a wonderful job of capturing those stories.
She did a great job, and she's worked with special operators before.
Right.
She's written 12, 13, 14 books. She's been a best-selling author before. So without her, I wouldn't have been able to do this book. And I posted yesterday when we were doing the book signings that she was with me in spirit, because I really wanted her to be here. I wanted her to experience it with me.
Yeah.
But she had a huge trip. It would have been a huge trip for her to do. But anyway, Lauren and I, we worked together so well, and she was able to bring things out, that I'd compartmentalized, like morgue day, is one of those days that's covered in the book. She was able to kind of bring these things out very carefully and not push me too far. It was like she knew exactly when to push and when to kind of go back. But our process that we found that worked best for us, because in my mind I was having a hard time because she's like, "Hey, I need Darrell 2006 team sergeant," and she's talking to Darrell 2023 senior executive that doesn't cuss as much as I used to cuss in 2006. Don't dip tobacco, but she's like, "Hey, I need that guy." And I need the emotion. What did you hear? What did you smell? What did you see? What did you taste?
Yeah,
You got to give me that.
About the five senses. Put the reader there, and you did that. In fact, smell in particular. There was a lot of in the book. There's a lot of smells.
There is a lot of smells.
One of which you said still haunts you to this day. The morgue.
The morgue day.
Yeah.
So what we found that worked best was I would write everything out. And I would send it to her, like several just pages of pages of pages. Once we had our outline, I would send it to her, and then we would talk on the phone. She's like, "Hey, I'm reading everything," and I'm thinking that I'm doing a great job, like I'm a little wannabe author, And she's like, "Darrell, I'm not trying to bust you down or anything, but you're not an author. Like you're just telling me a story. I'm gonna make it."
Yeah. Well, you're an author. You're just not a writer.
Yeah, writer. That's it.
And that's what we do as writers is we take the subject story in their words and we polish them for them and bring out all those other senses that you may not be thinking of because it's second nature to you. You were there, so you may not think to describe the smell or what the sky looked like that day, and that's our job as writers to bring that out of you. It sounds like
that's a great point. That's exactly what she was able to do, and I tried to just keep getting better and better, but she just was able to put a spin on it. That it's like, man, this is exactly what happened, but it just sounds so much better the way that you wrote it. So she did a great job. That's what really worked for us was me writing, the stories. And then her putting the finishing touches.
Well, the manuscript turned out great, and obviously when we got it at Ballast Books, we were thrilled. This is obviously right up our alley. We work with a lot of special operations folks. Our first book was with Green Beret. How did you come across Ballast Books, and what was your experience? So that was the manuscript, creation with Lauren.
Right.
Then the next step, the next big chunk of this is obviously the publishing piece. So what was that experience like for you?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, I think. Our audience might be able to see operator syndrome.
Yeah, Dr.
Chris Free. So Dr. Chris Free is someone that I was introduced through a former guy that worked for me in 2006 and 2007. His name is Ryan Land. He's a great guy. He's featured in the book Grit to Glory. But Ryan introduced me to Dr. Chris Free, and he was someone that I talked to occasionally, and we'd email.
And Dr. Chris he is I have to say, the foremost authority on he calls it operator syndrome, all the different things that are unique that special operations forces, so Navy SEALs, Green Berets, Rangers, MARSOC, there's Delta Force, you name it. He's the foremost authority on what they go through. So, traumatic brain injuries, PTSD, the unique war injuries, the unseen war injuries that they experience. In his book that Ballast published, Operator Syndrome, is become a bestseller. It's done absolutely wonderful, and he is very well respected in that community. And
for sure.
So that's
and. So I knew Dr. Chris Free. I knew he was coming out with a book. And I just got online because I really wanted to read Operator Syndrome. And didn't really know much about Ballast at all. Mm-hmm. But I went online. I ordered Operator Syndrome, because in the back of my mind, I had a manuscript that was getting ready to, wrap up.
Yeah.
So I love the process that, you guys have a really smooth process where people can pre-order. And you get notified like, hey, your pre-order's in, or hey, the book just shipped. Like, I got to be a customer of Ballast, and I really liked the process. I thought, like, man, I hope whoever does my book has a great process like this as well.
Good.
So then I was able to call Chris Free a little bit later on, and say, hey, how was your experience with Ballast? Because I want to get my book published. You know, it's not going to be one of the top 5 from New York, because that's just like a, you know, it's very hard. It's probably a low percentage that you're going to get a top 5. But I was like, I want a really good company that I can trust. And just to be honest with you, Chris, I loved Ballast, the process to order your book, Operator Syndrome. I can't wait to get it. You know, are they good? And Chris is someone that I trust and respect. And he was like, hey, man, I had a great experience with Andy and the whole team at Ballast. I would definitely recommend that you check them out, talk to Andy and talk to the team. And, you know, definitely you want to have these guys on the top of your list. And I talked to some other people, and it just didn't feel right. It just didn't feel like it was going to work. And then when I was able to talk to you, Andy, I had a great feeling. Lauren was familiar with you guys and worked with you guys
Lauren.
before. You know, obviously Chris, and I saw other special operators that had written books and published books through you guys. So it made it a really simple decision, an easy decision for me, was to go through Ballast. And my experiences, and I've shared this with you, Andy, my experiences with you and the team has just been extraordinary.
Thank
you. It's been a great experience, and I definitely don't regret it. I'm very, very pleased that I was able to go this route with you guys.
Good. Well, I appreciate that. And Dr. Chris, hopefully you're listening. Appreciate you introducing Darrell to us. We love Operator Syndrome, and we love working with guys like you. I mean, you've been nothing but obviously a pleasure to work with. We love the book. It sold really well. It still doesn't come out until December 3rd. And it sold really, really well. If you have, just a note, if you have pre-ordered at ballastbooks.com, Grit to Glory, you will receive your signed copy before the general release on December 3rd. But yeah, it's you're the type of guys, people we love to work with. I mean, we know what we're going to get. You have fascinating stories. We're so appreciative. I come from a military family. We're so appreciative of the sacrifices that you and people in your line of work have made for us. So we just love to work with veterans, and Grit to Glory was an absolute honor to publish. Work's not done. We're still selling a lot of books, but it turned out amazing. The manuscript, the cover, everything. We're just thrilled with how it turned out. So, So Darrell, where can people find you and reach you?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. Those are probably 2 of the primaries. I'm not a hard guy to find. I actually have my email in the back of Grit to Glory if you want to reach out. Maybe you want to hear a little bit about 2007. Could be a sequel. We'll see how that goes. But I'm not a hard guy to find. Probably the easiest way to connect with me is LinkedIn. Darrell Utt. There's not a lot.
Yeah, 2 R's, 2 L's, 2
L's,
T's.
2 T's. So yeah, just reach out. I'd be happy to connect. And speaking of all the sales so far, I'm just so humbled and grateful, for the folks that have trusted me with this story, and they want to check it out. I'm very grateful.
Well, the first orders got shipped yesterday. More are going out today.
Yeah.
And I don't think they're going to be disappointed. It's a wonderful book. Darrell, thank you so much for coming in. It was a pleasure. For all you at home, don't forget to pick up your copy of Grit to Glory, available everywhere the books are sold, but you can get your signed copy with a challenge coin if you order direct at ballastbooks.com. Just go to our bookstore and search for Grit to Glory or Darrell's name and pick up your signed copy there.